Welcome back to Lytudiep channel. Love, friendship, enemies will always exist in our lives. So in the life of Jame and Lytudiep, how did this story happen? Today, let's go to this story. James was the CEO of Dyson Timber, a man carved out of the noise of sawmills, hardened by the grain of teak, and refined by years of navigating the cutthroat lumber trade. On the surface, he was all sharp lines and cold logic. The kind of man who measured life by quarterly growth and export graphs. But deep within, hidden like soft pine beneath a shell of oak, was a heart that still remembered the scent of wet wood and the quiet of a village dawn. And then, one rainy day in the highlands, he met her. Lytudiep came into James's life not like thunder, but like mist. She was tying down a torn plastic sheet over a goat shelter while the rain lashed the hillside. Her cheeks were smeared with mud. Strands of wet hair stuck to her temples. But she smiled, not out of politeness, but like someone who had never learned how to be afraid of storms. James pulled over. Something in her made him pause, not beauty in the typical sense, but a presence. She was earthy, unhurried, and full of something he had long forgotten, contentment without ambition. She didn't know business. She knew goats and compost, the difference between fresh and rotted dung, how to coax milk from a fussy ewe, and the names of every chicken in her yard. She loved the world in small, quiet ways. And James, used to people who wore ambition like cologne, found her simplicity a kind of rebellion. Their visits became frequent. Coffee turned into lunches, then long conversations at the edge of fields. Months passed. Then one day, instead of taking her back to his luxury apartment in the city, James drove her to a low hill outside the suburbs, a derelict farm he'd bought years ago but never touched. "I once thought this place would be a resort," he said. "But now, I think it should be something else. If you agree." The farm was overgrown and broken, rusty gates, abandoned barns, roofs caved in. But in Lytudiep's eyes, it wasn't ruin, it was possibility. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Slowly, the place began to breathe again. Ducks waddled back into the pond. Sheep returned to graze. And a clumsy calf was born under a crescent moon. James transformed, too. From boardrooms to barns, he learned to wake with the sun, to weigh hay instead of balance sheets, and to celebrate not profits but the hatching of a stubborn hen's first chick. They made their home there, in the scent of damp straw, manure, and warm milk, a scent most city people would flinch at. But to James, it smelled like truth. Their nights were filled with laughter over badly played guitar and stories about the stubborn goat that chewed through the fence again. Then one monsoon, James fell ill. The fever was cruel. Lytudiep nursed him with herbal steam and porridge, her hands warm on his burning skin. He dreamt in that haze of another life, of being an old farmer searching for lost eggs in the bushes while his wife, still barefoot and sun-kissed, laughed from the porch. When he awoke, James was changed forever. He stepped down as CEO, delegated the company's future, and turned down every offer to return to corporate life. "I have you," he told her. "I have lambs. I have plum blossoms in spring. I don't need more." One golden afternoon, while washing their sheep in the creek, James knelt in wet grass, hands still muddy, and pulled out a small silver ring. No cathedrals, no speeches, just sheep and water and the sky. "Will you live the rest of this life, with mud, with hay, with goats, and with me?" Lytudiep laughed through her tears. "I already have. The ring just makes it official." They married with no fanfare. Villagers brought fresh bread, wild flowers, and sweet potatoes. Kids played drums on tin cans. The village dog barked as James kissed his bride beneath the guava tree. Their love was witnessed not by gold or lace, but by crops, animals, and clouds. But while James built this quiet heaven, the winds of the past stirred beyond the hills. Tungam, James's best friend turned betrayer, had vanished from the city, once the right hand of Dyson. Tungam fell into resentment after James rejected his independent lumber project. The silence cut deep. When John, James's sworn enemy, approached Tungam, the man was already wounded. John knew how to weaponize bitterness. He fed Tung's anger, pulled him into financial sabotage, fake exports, insider leaks. But it was never about money. John wanted James broken, like his own father, who had hanged himself after a failed deal with Dyson decades ago. Tungam didn't realize how far he'd gone until he found an old document signed by James, a trust agreement giving Tungam oversight in James's absence. In the margin, handwritten, "If anything goes wrong, Tungam will be the first to notice." It broke him. Tungam gathered every piece of evidence, voice recordings, altered contracts, offshore trails, and sent it all to the press. Then he disappeared. Not to escape, but to redeem. John, thinking himself victorious, was caught at the airport trying to flee the country, in handcuffs. He sneered at the cameras, "I only gave back what was stolen from my father." The case was massive. But when James heard the whole truth, he didn't rage. Instead, he walked down to the creek beside Lytudiep and whispered, "John once wanted to be a carpenter. My father refused. We were all just boys, turned into men by choices we didn't fully understand." A year passed. One day, James received a postcard, a watercolor of the sea, painted childishly. On the back, in Tung's handwriting, "I've opened a tiny wood shop by the coast. 3 students. 1 dog. Come visit." I kept our old carving tools. I remember the smell of pine after rain. James smiled and tucked the card away. He never wrote back. But weeks later, villagers on the coast saw a strange couple moving in next to Tung's workshop. They raised sheep, made cheese, and in the evenings, the sounds of guitar, children's laughter, and the rhythmic tap of chisels filled the salty air. Tungam would draw blueprints by oil lamp. James would sand the wood smooth. And Lytudiep, ever radiant, poured ginger tea and told stories to the next generation. Some friendships fracture, some betrayals scar. But forgiveness, when it finds its way home, is stronger than steel. And love, when it takes root not in romance, but in soil, sweat, and silence, will weather every storm. Thank you for following the story. I wish you all good health. The details of the story will still be behind. Please follow the channel to follow. Lytudiep.